My name is Wendy Tolliver. I'm 33. At my mother's 60th birthday party, I said one short sentence and walked out the door. That sentence ended a 7-year silence and started a permanent one. For 7 years, my parents pretended my husband and I didn't exist. They skipped our calls, left us off every guest list, and told the rest of the family that Garrett, the man I married, the man I built a life with, was, and I'm quoting my brother here, the family embarrassment. His crime? He grows tomatoes. Heirloom tomatoes, the kind chefs drive an hour to buy, but my family never got past the word farmer. My parents needed $3 million the night of that birthday, and the only person who could help was the daughter they'd thrown away. But here's what none of them knew about those tomatoes. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where daughters, sons, and spouses share stories about the moments they stopped tolerating disrespect from the people who were supposed to love them most. Drop a comment if you've ever been mocked for your partner's career, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens at that birthday table. I grew up in a small town south of Columbus, Ohio. Screen doors, church potlucks, the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew whose truck was parked where. My father, Frank Morrison, was a mechanic. Good hands, steady paycheck, quiet man. My mother, Carol, worked the front desk at a dentist's office until Kyle came along, and then she stayed home. Kyle is my brother, 3 years younger. And from the day he was born, the math in our house shifted. I don't mean my parents were cruel. I mean they were strategic. Kyle got the college fund, a real one. Savings account and everything. I got a used Corolla and a good luck, honey. Kyle got tutors when his grades dipped. I got a pat on the back and a reminder that girls figure things out. My dad took Kyle to every career fair, every open house, every networking dinner his high school organized. When I asked to go, Dad said, "You don't need all that." So I figured things out. I worked the register at a grocery store through high school, saved every dollar, and enrolled in a state school 40 minutes from home to study accounting. I paid my own tuition. I bought my own textbooks. I drove that Corolla until the transmission gave out, and then I took the bus. I didn't resent Kyle. Not then. He was a kid getting what his parents handed him. The problem wasn't Kyle. The problem was the principle underneath. Boys build futures. Girls marry into them. My parents never said it that way. They didn't have to. The budget said it for them. I met Garrett Tolliver when I was 24. He worked logistics for a food distribution company, and I did the books for the same outfit. He smelled like cardboard and black coffee, and I liked him before I learned his last name. Garrett was tall, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he talked and meant every word when he finally did. He told me about the 12 acres his grandfather left him outside of town. Good soil, south-facing slope. He wanted to grow heirloom tomatoes, not the waxy kind you get at the supermarket, but the ones with names like Cherokee Purple and Brandywine and Sun Gold. The kind chefs build menus around. I didn't say, "That's crazy." I said, "Show me the soil report." He showed me. I showed him a business plan I drafted on a napkin over lunch. We were married 14 months later. Small ceremony, backyard of a friend's house. My parents came. Dad shook Garrett's hand once like he was meeting a loan officer. Mom smiled the way she smiled at checkout clerks. Kyle didn't come. Said he had a work thing. At the reception, Mom pulled Aunt Ruth aside. I heard it because I was standing close enough to the cooler. "At least he has land," Mom said. That was the warmest thing she ever said about Garrett. I held on to those words longer than I should have, like maybe she'd come around, like maybe once the farm started producing, once Garrett proved himself, they'd see what I saw. I was wrong about that. But I wasn't wrong about the soil report. The first year of farming nearly broke us. Garrett put in 16-hour days working the rows, prepping beds, laying drip line, building a greenhouse out of reclaimed lumber. I kept my CPA job during the day and ran the farm books at night. We lost $12,000 that first season. Half our seeds didn't germinate. A late frost took the early tomatoes. I covered the loss with my salary and didn't tell anyone. Meanwhile, Kyle landed a position at an investment firm in Columbus, real estate development. The dinner table at my parents' house, which I was still invited to that year, turned into a Kyle showcase. Kyle closed on a property downtown. Kyle's firm is looking at a new development. Kyle, tell Wendy about the investor dinner. Kyle talked, and my parents glowed. That Thanksgiving, Garrett and I drove 40 minutes to the Morrison house with a crate of our first heirloom tomatoes, Cherokee purples, deep and ugly and incredible. Garrett set the crate on the counter. Kyle looked at it, leaned back in his chair and said, "That's cute." Mom thanked Garrett in the voice she used when someone brought a dish she wouldn't eat. Later, when I was washing dishes, I found the crate. In the trash. The tomatoes were buried under paper towels like evidence somebody wanted to hide. I pulled one out. Perfect skin. Deep purple. Still warm from the drive. I put it back and finished the dishes. That was the last Thanksgiving before the first Christmas we weren't invited to. December, that year. I called Mom to ask about Christmas dinner. What time? What to bring? The usual. There was a pause. Not a thinking pause. A choosing words pause. "Oh, honey," she said. "We're keeping it small this year." Small. Just us and Kyle, and his girlfriend. She works in finance too. I asked why. Why we weren't invited. Why small meant everyone except us. Mom laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, not exactly. It was a dismissive one. The kind you use when someone asks a question with an obvious answer. "Your husband grows tomatoes, Wendy. What did you expect?" She said it like she was telling me water was wet. Like the answer had been sitting there all along, and I was silly for not seeing it. I said, "Merry Christmas, Mom." And I hung up. I sat in the truck in our driveway for a long time. The engine was off. The windows were fogging up from my breath. Garrett came out after a while, leaned against the driver's door and said, "What's wrong?" I said, "We're not invited." He didn't ask why. He didn't get angry. He just opened the door, took my hand and walked me inside. That night I made Christmas dinner for two. A roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a pie that didn't set right. We ate at the kitchen table with the farm book spread at one end and a candle in a mason jar at the other. It was quiet. It was ours. And it was the beginning of 7 years of silence I didn't choose. The pattern locked in fast. Year 2, no Easter invite. Year 3, Frank turned 60. I heard about the party from a cousin's wife's Instagram post. A photo of Kyle with his arm around Dad, cake in the background, 20 people in the living room. Nobody called me. Year 4, Kyle got engaged. I learned about it from a forwarded group text that someone forgot to remove me from. A photo of Kyle's fiancée with Mom at a family barbecue, both of them laughing, holding matching glasses of wine. Mom's caption read, "My 2 girls." She had a daughter. She just didn't mean me. The nickname started around year 3. Kyle coined it at a 4th of July gathering. He was talking to cousin Brian, beer in hand, and said, "Garrett? The Family Embarrassment? He's out there playing in dirt while Wendy does his taxes." Brian told his wife. His wife told my old school friend. My old school friend texted me the quote, word for word, and added, "I'm so sorry." I didn't confront anyone. I didn't call Mom and scream. I didn't write a letter. I did something else. I sat at the kitchen table that night with Garrett and I filed the LLC papers for Tolliver Heritage Farms. I slid them across the table to Garrett and said, "Sign here." He read every line, looked up at me, signed. We were no longer 2 people with a garden. We were a company. And the company was named after the man my family refused to name at all. That was the year the farm stopped losing money. Year 3, we landed our first restaurant contract. A farm-to-table place in town. Small, ambitious, the kind of restaurant where the chef actually read the growing conditions on your invoice. He tasted our sun golds and ordered 200 pounds a month. Then a second restaurant signed on. Then a chef in Columbus drove 90 minutes just to walk our rows. He stood there, holding a brandywine in both hands like it was something sacred, and said, "I've been looking for these for 2 years." By year 5, Tolliver Heritage Farms supplied over 40 restaurants within a 3-hour radius, heirloom tomatoes, specialty peppers, microgreens in the winter months. I quit my CPA day job at the end of year 5 because the farm needed me full-time. I built the invoicing system, ran the distribution calendar, negotiated contracts. Garrett grew. I sold. We hired our first employee, a 22-year-old kid named Danny who showed up in mud boots and never missed a shift. By year 6, we had 3 employees. Revenue crossed into 6 figures and kept climbing. All of it. Every delivery, every contract, every row of Cherokee purples planted before dawn happened in silence. Not a single call from Carol, not a single visit from Frank. Kyle didn't know we existed. Garrett never brought up my family unless I did. And I didn't. "We built something," I told him one evening on the porch, eating tomato sandwiches on white bread with mayo and salt. "We built it without them." He nodded. That was enough. I didn't know it then, but somewhere around year 5, my parents stopped being able to pay their property taxes. Year 6. Aunt Ruth called. First time in over a year. She started with small talk. Weather, her hip, a recipe she'd clipped from a magazine. Then she said, "How's the farm doing? Garrett still growing those tomatoes?" She'd never asked before. Her tone was different, lighter, trying too hard. I let her talk. She mentioned Dad had fixed the roof himself this past summer. "Your father's getting older," she said. "Not as quick as he used to be." I knew what she was really saying. They couldn't afford a roofer. After we hung up, I sat at the desk where I ran the farm's books, opened my laptop, and did what any accountant would do. I looked things up: county assessor records, property tax rolls, court filings, public information, all of it. What I found took me 45 minutes to process. My parents' property taxes were 2 years delinquent. Frank's name was on a commercial mortgage filing, $3.2 million, as a cosigner. The borrower was listed as Morrison Capital Holdings, LLC, Kyle's company. I pulled up the LLC registration. Kyle Morrison, sole managing member. Filed 3 years ago. The commercial property was a strip mall development out near the highway. The kind of thing you drive past and think, who's building that? I sat in my truck in the county clerk's parking lot for a long time. I didn't call Garrett. I didn't call Ruth. I just sat there doing math. $3 million. My parents had signed their names to it. And the only person they hadn't spoken to in 7 years was the only person who might be able to help. 7 years. That's how long my parents pretended I didn't exist. 7 years of Christmases with an empty chair where I used to sit. And now there was a $3 million hole where their retirement should have been. If you've ever been the one your family ignored until they needed something, tell me in the comments. What did you do? Stay with me. What happened next is the reason I'm telling this story. I told Garrett that night. We sat on the porch after the crew went home, and I laid it out. The delinquent taxes, the commercial mortgage, Kyle's LLC, $3.2 million in debt with Frank's name on the line. Garrett listened the way he always listened. All the way through, no interruptions, no reactions until I was finished. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" Not, "What should we do?" Not, "They don't deserve it." Just, "What do you want?" I ran the numbers. The land alone, 12 acres with the greenhouses, the cold storage building, the irrigation infrastructure, had appraised at $1.8 million last spring when the bank renewed our operating line. Add our savings, the untouched credit line backed by 3 years of commercial contracts, and the equity we'd built in equipment. If we leveraged everything, stretched ourselves to the edge, we could cover $3 million. It would drain our emergency fund. It would mean 2 lean years, maybe 3. But it was possible. The math worked. The question was whether it should. I could save my parents, I told him, but I don't know if saving them would cost me something money doesn't cover. Garrett looked out at the fields. dark by then, just the outline of the greenhouse against the sky. You don't have to decide tonight. I know. And you don't have to decide alone. I leaned against him. He put his arm around me. The crickets were loud that time of year. I'm going to wait, I said. If they want my help, they'll have to ask for it. I'm not going to volunteer. He nodded. We sat there a while longer. Then I went inside and opened my laptop and started looking at refinancing terms just in case. Because accountants plan. Even when they're not sure they want to. A month later, I heard the rest. A former colleague, another accountant who handled books for small businesses around Columbus, mentioned Kyle's name over coffee. Morrison Capital? That strip mall out on Route 33? Dead in the water, she said. Half the spaces never leased. The anchor tenant pulled out 6 months in. Construction went over budget twice. She didn't know Kyle was my brother. I didn't correct her. She kept going. Kyle had borrowed more to cover the overruns, restructured the loan, borrowed again, made payments for 8 months, then missed 1, then missed 3. The bank sent a default notice. And because Frank had co-signed the mortgage, because Kyle needed his parents' creditworthiness to get the loan in the first place, Frank and Carol were now personally liable. I did the math again. Their house was worth maybe $180,000. Frank's retirement account, if there was anything left, might have $50,000. His pension ran about $1,800 a month. Against $3.2 million in liability, those numbers were rounding errors. They would lose the house. Frank's pension would be garnished. Carol's future, every plan, every safe year she'd imagined, was attached to a strip mall nobody wanted. My colleague mentioned one more thing. His fiancée left him. Couple months ago. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity. Just a flat recognition of a fact. Kyle Morrison, the investor, the golden career, the man my parents chose, was 30 years old and sinking. And somewhere in that town, my parents were still telling people everything was fine. A Tuesday morning, September. The kind of morning that makes you understand why people farm. Garrett was walking the rows before the crew arrived, checking the late-season brandy wines. Dew on the leaves. The greenhouse humming. I was at the kitchen table with the books open, processing orders. A chef from a new restaurant in Dayton called to ask about our heirloom brandy wines. He was building his fall menu around them and needed 200 pounds a week. I quoted him a fair price and scheduled the first delivery for Friday. Danny loaded the morning truck. 2 new part-timers were staking plants in the east field. The farm was alive in a way that used to surprise me and now just felt like breathing. Garrett came in around noon. We ate lunch on the porch because that's what we did. Tomato sandwiches, white bread, mayo, a thick slice of Cherokee purple, salt. Simple. Perfect. We sat there eating what my mother called embarrassing, and I thought, this is the best thing I've ever tasted. Ruth called again, Garrett said. Asking about you? Asking about us. I set down my sandwich. Or asking about our bank account. Garrett didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew. The calls from Ruth were coming every 2 weeks now, each one a little more transparent. How's the farm? Are you expanding? Did you take on investors? She wasn't subtle. She was on assignment. She'll stop when they finally ask me directly, I said. Or she'll stop when they find someone else to ask. 3 days later, the invitation arrived. It was a physical card. Cream-colored, scalloped edges. The kind you buy at a stationery shop when you want something to feel important. My mother's handwriting on the front. My name. Our farm address. Inside, you are invited to celebrate Carol Morrison's 60th birthday. A date in October. A time. The address. My parents' house. Same as always. And at the bottom, in Carol's hand, a line she'd added herself. It would mean the world to have you there, Wendy. I read the card 3 times. I noticed everything an accountant would notice. 1. My name only. Not Wendy and Garrett. Not the Tollivers. Just Wendy. 2. The timing. The birthday was October 15th. The bank's default notice had been filed August 2nd. The party was exactly 2 months after the threat became real. 3. The phrase, "It would mean the world." My mother had never written those words to me, not on a birthday card, not on a graduation note, not once in 33 years. She needed something, and the world was the price. I brought the card inside and set it on the kitchen table. Garrett picked it up, read it, set it down. "They want me there," I said. "Not you. Me. Do you want to go?" I thought about that for a long time. Longer than the question seemed to need. I thought about the thung ka chua in the trash 7 years ago. I thought about Mom's laugh on the phone. I thought about the county clerk's records and $3.2 million with Dad's name on them. "Yes," I said, "but not alone. I'm bringing you." I called Ruth. "I'm coming to the party," I said, "and I'm bringing Garrett." Ruth paused. A long pause. "I'll let Carol know," she said. She didn't argue. She didn't ask me to reconsider. She just paused and then complied, which told me everything about how bad things really were. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't write down talking points or practice what I'd say when they asked for money. I already knew what my condition would be. One condition. Simple enough to grant in 30 seconds. Heavy enough to matter for a lifetime. If they ask for money, I told Garrett, I'll help them. But there's something I need first. "I know," he said. He didn't ask what the condition was. He already knew, because he'd been living inside it for 7 years. The absence of his name in their mouths, the blank space where their acknowledgement should have been. The night before the party, I pulled a dress from the closet. Nothing flashy. A dark green A-line I'd bought for a farm association dinner 2 years ago. I put on the watch Garrett gave me for our 5th anniversary. An Omega. The first luxury we'd allowed ourselves after the farm turned profitable. Understated. Quality. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you knew watches. I packed one more thing, from a box on the top shelf of the closet, a box Carol had dropped on our porch during year 2 of the silence. A cardboard box labeled "Your Stuff" in her handwriting. No note. Just objects from my childhood, dumped on the porch like items cleared from a foreclosed property. Inside that box was something I hadn't opened in 5 years. It was my mother's Christmas cookbook. Spiral-bound, flour-stained, held together with a rubber band and 20 years of use. Carol Morrison's recipe collection, handwritten, every page, in the blue ballpoint she kept in the kitchen drawer next to the measuring spoons. I used to sit on the counter as a kid and watch her flip through it every December. Sweet potato casserole, cranberry relish, pecan pie with the crust she rolled out by hand, and the ham. The glazed ham with brown sugar and cloves that was the centerpiece of every Morrison Christmas for as long as I could remember. I opened the cookbook to the ham page. The recipe was written in her neat, slanted script, with notes in the margins. Temperatures adjusted, timing corrections, a reminder about the brand of mustard that worked best. And there, at the bottom of the page, in the same blue ink, faded now, but legible. "Wendy loves the glaze best, double it." Written maybe 20 years ago, when I was a girl who sat on the counter and stuck my finger in the glaze when Mom wasn't looking. She noticed. She remembered. She doubled it. For me. I sat on the closet floor holding that cookbook for a long time. The house was quiet. Garrett was already asleep. I ran my thumb over the ink and thought about the woman who wrote it. The version of my mother who noticed what her daughter loved and adjusted the recipe without being asked. That woman existed once. Maybe she was still in there, under the pride and the years and the choices she'd made. Maybe all it would take was something small. Something as small as a name. I put the cookbook in my bag. Not to show her. Not as ammunition. Just as a reminder to myself. She was capable of love. She'd just stopped choosing it. Maybe at that dinner table she'd choose it again. 4 days before the party. I didn't rehearse. I didn't call Ruth for updates. I didn't look at the property records again. I already knew what I knew. Garrett went about his routine. Morning walks through the rows, checking drainage, coordinating deliveries. but he cleaned his boots that Friday. Not the quick scrub he gave them after a field day, but a real cleaning, the kind that takes time and a stiff brush and care. He pressed a shirt, laid it on the bed next to a pair of slacks I hadn't seen him wear in years. "I haven't been to your parents' house since the wedding," he said. I looked at him. Thought about that. 7 years. "They haven't invited you since the wedding," I said. He nodded, buttoned the shirt, stood in front of the mirror for a moment, and I realized he was nervous. Garrett Tolliver, who could negotiate with a restaurant supply chain without blinking, who'd faced a season-ending hailstorm with nothing but tarps and willpower, was nervous about walking into my mother's living room. "We don't have to go," he said. The same words he'd said 7 years ago, the night of that first Christmas. Back then, I'd said nothing. I'd just cried in the truck. This time I answered. "I know. But I need to." He reached for my hand, held it. "Let it go. Then we go." I zipped my bag, the dress, the watch, the cookbook at the bottom, wrapped in a scarf so the spine wouldn't bend. My condition was the simplest thing in the world. Say his name, look at him, apologize. That's it. If they could do that, I'd write a check that would save their house, their retirement, their future. If they couldn't, we'd drive home. Saturday evening, October. The light was low and gold on the fields when we pulled out of the farm driveway. Garrett drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my bag in my lap, the cookbook a hard rectangle against my thigh. 40 minutes on county roads, through farm country that turned to strip malls that turned to the old neighborhood. I watched the landscape shift and thought about how the same 40 minutes felt different depending on which direction you were driving. Going toward my parents' house had always felt like shrinking. Going home to the farm had always felt like expanding. The old neighborhood looked the same, mostly. Same ranch houses, same chain-link fences, same oak trees that were saplings when my parents moved in, and were now thick enough to climb. But the Morrison house, I spotted it 3 blocks out. The paint was peeling. Not a little. A lot. The shutters on the upstairs windows were crooked. The hedges hadn't been trimmed in what looked like 2 seasons. Frank Morrison would have fixed all of that 3 years ago. Cars lined both sides of the street. I counted. More than 30. This wasn't a small family dinner. This was an event. Carol had invited everyone. Extended family, neighbors, friends from church. She'd wanted a full room. She wanted an audience, I said. Garrett pulled in behind a